Hello, my name is Anne Varley and I designed and made the quilt called Ocean Point that appears in this summer's Quiltmania magazine. I'm incredibly grateful to Quiltmania for taking my quilt and the samples I sent and for turning them into this beautifully photographed and presented and described pattern. So in the magazine you'll find everything you need to make the quilt, but I thought it might be really helpful to provide a short video that I made while I was finishing the quilt to help you with some of the concepts around the borders and the edges. I hope you enjoy making this quilt and look forward to seeing some examples in the future. Pots and baskets of shells adorn our house and remind us of our lovely summer beach holidays and winter strolls on the sand. I decided to make a quilt on the base of this to remind us of those lovely times. So I took a base fabric and then imagined a splattering of shells across that I would applique. So I found some shell fabrics. Here's one that I could cut up. So cut out lots of shell shapes with enough space to be able to applique down. This is all for needle turn applique. I also found a lovely vintage fabric with really beautiful shapes and patterns that felt like the seaside. Very similar to a much more brightly coloured version that has been released by K Facet. Look at that phenomenal colour. As a foil to all this lovely applique and to add my shapes on the outside border, I chose a pattern fabric that looked like newsprint and maps and just really sang but was very subtle. I wanted to experiment with English paper piecing shapes and with hexagons and having lines of hexagons and other shapes joined together so that I knew it would be very effective and as a way of linking different fabrics across a quilt. So you can see here on the inner border how the line of appliqued hexagons joins the central main body of the quilt and the applique and this outer border. So to achieve that, I first of all cut out my hexagon fabrics to fit round my templates. I glued down using a light fabric glue. Here are some examples. So you can see I've used this many times. I didn't use much glue, but just finger folded and pressed into place, going around my applique shape. Like this, all the way around, so that I had a number of covered hexagons. I then took out the papers after having pressed with the iron and then pressed onto the back pieces of interfacing. So I just cut out pieces of interfacing that were slightly smaller than the hexagon, made sure I'd got the glue bit down, and once the paper was out, ironed it on with a pressing action. Now the reason for doing that is because it stabilizes. So without that paper, take a shape. Here's a shape without the interfacing in. It can distort and become very misshapen, which is really hard work. And also, when you're working on the edges of the quilt, it would fray. Whereas with that interfacing in place, that's not going to go anywhere and you can work on it for months without any damage to it. I then used tiny stitches between the two to join together so that I had a string of hexagons. Now here is an unfinished border of my main quilt, and you can see how I then tacked those into place and then appliqued them down onto the quilt. Now, the outer border is slightly different than the inner borders, because what we're going to do is have those appliqued on hexagons and diamonds on both sides so that you form this lovely edge. And the way to achieve that is to do exactly as I did before. So for the top side, there's one row that has been appliqued on, and then I've tacked on a line of another row that I have then whip stitched round. So I'm just going to show you how I then flip it out. So carefully, with to the point sharp scissors, I'm cutting the backing, the wadding, and I used wool this time because I just love quilting wool. So cut round carefully and remove the spare wadding, cut to the point, then I can remove the tacking stitches and then very carefully flip the wadding, the backing and all the bits inside, so that on the front you've got this lovely edge and on the back, and then I can either pin or tack the line down and then applique on the outer edge, so that you get this really, really effective, beautiful edge. And I thought that that, in combination with the anchors and the crowns and the coral with Baptist fan quilting patterns, made a really, really effective and lovely reminder of beautiful days on the beach. So now that you've read the instructions and seen my videos, I'm hoping that you'll have all the materials that you need to make this beautiful quilt. Thank you, Quiltmania,